This podcast is supported by patrons. You can find a full list of them in the description of this episode. Hello, good morning, good evening, listeners of Good Morning BSS World podcast. This is Wiktor, Doktor, and today I am not here alone. I have a great speaker from Ireland who is Barry Winkless. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Wiktor. How are you?
Very nice to meet you again, this time online. We have recently seen each other offline in real life in Warsaw. How was it?
Warsaw was fantastic. Really liked the Polish people, I have to say, and I really loved the event. I have to say it was inspiring, it was energizing, and it really highlighted how bringing diverse people together creates magic.
That was the idea, actually, to show all of those items during this one-day event. And today you are where?
I am in Ireland today. Yes, I am actually. I live just across from the beach and the ocean. So I would like to say it's very sunny here, but not quite. It's grey, but still beautiful.
Probably today the whole Europe looks similar. In Warsaw, we don't have much sun yet. No, it's not too sunny today anyway. Okay, Barry, maybe for the very beginning, let's say a few words about who you are and what you are doing on a daily basis, because you are a person who actually is not in one role. You are at least in two roles, as I understand it. One is with your business, which is CPL, and the other is...
Yeah, the Future of Work Institute. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I like to say, actually, funny enough, Wiktor, I wish I had only two roles, but within CPL, I have three roles. My first role is as the Chief Strategy Officer of CPL Group. So ultimately that means on a day-to-day basis, I'm making sure that our 5-year strategy is being developed and being deployed across Europe. So that's obviously a really key part of my role. So as part of the executive group, I make sure that happens, and I make sure my CEO is kept very, very happy. The second part of my role, as you mentioned, is the head of the Future of Work Institute, and that is a multidisciplinary team of experts in their fields, and we focus on all things got to do with the future of work. So it could be something like how we're going to work into the future, how we need to lead into the future, what type of technologies are going to disrupt how we actually work, what are the new business models we're going to use, and everything in between. And then my third role is I actually head up our brand and marketing teams as well for CPL Group. So it keeps me very, very busy. It's a very broad and varied role, I would say, but I do enjoy it. And I think the variety is something that is really it's really a theme through my career, whereas I've always, looked for that kind of breadth of role. So quite happy with where I am. I'm 5 years in CPL now as well. So we've pushed a lot of things on in that time.
But with this, what you are saying, actually, this is at least a bucket of work for at least 3 people, and you do it on your own.
Yeah, I'm going to send this to my CEO, and I can tell her that. So.
But actually, that was the reason why I invited you to my show, because this is a very interesting part of, first of all, your life, secondly, of the topics which you are taking care of. And this is why we also have invited you to be our guest in the Focus on Business magazine, where you are our cover page person with a great interview, sharing with us a lot of insights and stories focused on the future of work and of the future of the leadership, or actually the evolving the leadership from the phase where we are now and where we are going to be. So maybe let's focus a little bit on that. Let's start with your institute. So few words, how it was created and what's the main goal for the institute?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Wiktor. It was actually part and parcel of our strategy. So if you think about CPL, we have roughly about 4,000 clients across Europe. And one of our goals within our strategy was to make sure as best as we could that our clients were what we would call future ready. So that we would provide them with the insights, ideas, experiments, pilots, new thinking that would keep them on top of their thinking, right? And that's really what the Future Work Institute originally was set up to do, was to support our existing clients, challenge their thinking, and help them to embrace new designs around work. Now, it's since, shall we say, gotten a lot bigger because of the success of the work that we've done. And now we often will do projects that, are not necessarily CPL clients, but they're become CPL clients because of the work that we do with them. And on a kind of a day-to-day basis, we really do three things. One is research. So we do a lot of what we would call applied research. So we generally like to work with organizations on applying new ideas or finding out new things. And we generally do that to create what we would call models of change. So we created a future of work model actually about 3.5 years ago. We created a holistic wellness and leadership model a couple of years ago. And we've actually recently created a employee value proposition model as well. So a lot of our research is very much action focused, because ultimately we want to be able to give these tools to leaders to drive change within their organization. So I think, that's the first thing. The second thing we do is we work on projects. So we're every day of the week, my team are working on live projects with some of the world's most respected organizations in various areas. So we could be working with one business on their overall value proposition. On another organization, we could be developing a future female leadership program. On another organization, we might be implementing their hybrid working methodology. So it's quite varied and it's quite interesting from the consultancy perspective. And then really the third part for me is actually very much collaborative. And one of the reasons actually I was really excited to be part of the Pro Progresso conference in Warsaw. We also have a kind of a network of leaders that we call the Future Work World. And we work with those leaders to, ask new questions and, find new perspectives on the future of work as well. So they're the three main areas that we focus in on. And I should say that's beyond Ireland. So it's Ireland, UK, Europe, and into the US. And, many, many interesting projects. And we're actually about to launch a survey called the Changing Expectations of Life, Work and Society. Where we will ultimately create a documentary series on the future of work and what it means to each of us as individuals, how it impacts our families, how it impacts, broader teams, broader organizations, governments and societies in general.
You mentioned, and I wrote here it down, working with leaders if they are future ready.
Yeah.
Are the leaders future ready?
Some, I would say. It's a really good question. I think what's happening is we're starting to move into what I would call a new phase of leadership in general. So I think what was really interesting for me, actually, Wiktor, at your conference recently, because sometimes I like to eavesdrop, and stand back and have a listen to the zeitgeist of the conversation. And what was really interesting to me within the Polish context is similar to some other countries I've been in. The fundamental conversation is around moving from functional leadership into human-based leadership. And if I was to sum up many of the conversations I had the privilege to be part of and listening to some of those great panels, that really was the big thing that jumped out at me, is that there's a burgeoning drive towards this more human and holistic centered leadership in general. And, you will know this well, Wiktor, the innovator's dilemma. It's exactly the same idea. We're at the point now where we've gotten used to doing a particular way of leading. We've gotten used to particular structures and way of doing things. And now all of a sudden this new approach is coming along and some people are kind of going, oh, that's not for me. And it's a bit of a stretch. But ultimately, where human leadership will bring us is a lot further than functional leadership, right? So we have a much further value that we can create through human leadership. And there's tons of studies to highlight that a much more collaborative, human-centered leader can get a huge amount more performance, out of their teams. And that's in any team. It could be shared services teams, outsourcing teams, core teams, back office teams. It doesn't matter. So I think that's the big thing I really noticed in my own observations of those conversations. It's that kind of, are we ready to make that jump? And I think some people are in there. Some people are, and there's always leaders that will, drive a particular perspective that other people will go, actually, there's something in that approach. So that's where I think is a really interesting place for leaders. And I do think it's not about wholesale change either. I always ask leaders, like, what's the one thing differently that you could do tomorrow that would make you a much more human-centered leader, right? And I think that's a question that most people can answer if they really sit down and go, yeah, actually, do you know what? there's probably something we can do here. So I think that's the big one for me, and particularly actually in the Polish context, is obviously we will look at different cultural norms, in different countries within Europe. And I do think if I was to sum Poland up, the real opportunity for Polish organizations, and particularly when they look at the thriving outsourcing community in Poland, is actually for me, that type of leadership is part and parcel of creating that competitive advantage for Poland, in this particular space. So it's not a small thing. It feels soft and it can feel kind of, oh yeah, it's quite esoteric, but actually human-centered leadership drives all sorts of benefits at both an individual team, but also at a country, governmental level, right? So that's where I think the big opportunity for me is, for my own conversations with fantastic people I met over there, is that, can we make that jump to human-centered leadership that really differentiates Poland as a country, within Europe, and helps to, and obviously, Wiktor, we're talking within the context of, Poland is one of the top 5 outsourcing centers, right? That's part and parcel for me of driving that attraction, right, of Poland in there too. But it's a much broader global phenomenon as well, I'd say.
Oh, definitely, definitely. So human-centric leadership, this is something what we should focus on. Can we teach people how to be human-centric leaders?
It's a really interesting question. I think what we can do is we can work with people to understand that actually leadership is an innate ability. Okay, so I fundamentally believe, and a lot of the scientific studies will have kind of highlighted this, that leaders are made, they're not born, right? There are some instances where, leaders are born, right? You might say like somebody like Alexander, right, was a born leader, and there are a few, but by and large, a lot of research would suggest that leaders are actually made, right? So I think the first thing we can recognize is that actually, we can develop people, and we can actually make them, something more than what they are, right? I think coaching is a very, very important role here, because I think, when we automatically use the phrase, can we teach leaders or can we learn? We automatically, because I automatically do this as well, I automatically switch to, a course or a training course or something like that. And actually for me, it's more around finding that mentor or that maybe more senior person in the organization, or somebody that that represents that more human approach, and learning and absorbing through that process. So I absolutely do believe that, we can, as individuals, because we are humans, right? I know it sounds really simple, but, we peel back those layers. I think we can do that. And I fundamentally believe that, there are opportunities for leaders to, make those small changes. So a really, really simple example, meetings, right? We do a lot of them, a huge amount of them. I know I probably do too many of them. And my focus is always really about, how do I make that meeting a much more safe and human space? So that was my simple thing, Wiktor, when I started this, my own journey, I suppose, on my own leadership style, was how do I actually create a genuinely safe space? And I have one very simple principle for my team. It's okay to fail. Now, that seems like nothing, but I would say it took a good year for my team to actually understand that, right? Because, people automatically go, oh God, if I do this, I'll make a mistake, blah, 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 blah. But actually, that simple phrase repeated and following and adopting behaviors that shows people that it's okay to fail actually unleashes all sorts of talent, right? Because straight away now that shackle has been taken away from their mind. Now, that is not being afraid to fail, but whilst also learning while you fail. And it's a really, really powerful, human-centered, simple thing that you can work with, people on that. And I know often people will say to me, oh, what about very sensitive industries, or if we make a mistake, my point is you'll still make mistakes anyway, but you need to embrace the fact that things will happen, but it's how we react to them and the behaviors that we create after them will create this more human-centered approach. So I always think there's one simple principle that a leader can adopt, and it mightn't necessarily be that one, right? It might be another one, that people will actually say, you know what, I've now done that one thing that has moved me towards a human-centered approach. I have a good colleague of mine who I worked with in the previous organization, who's now a CEO of a large organization. And, you know, his big focus is always about empowerment, right? So his thing is always about that one thing that he thinks he should do himself. He forces himself to give to his team. And it's really uncomfortable for him. But he lives by this one philosophy of empowerment first, ego after, right? So empowerment first, ego after. And he keeps saying this mantra, you know what I mean? You know, it doesn't, mind you, it doesn't count when we're in the bar and he's supposed to pay for his drinks. You know, it's more that it's like ego first and then empowerment, because we end up paying for his drinks. But I think every leader can have that one simple mantra that by default then makes them more human, you know, and then actually unleashes that, you know, that kind of team dynamic.
I would come back to those failures and mistakes. Actually, we have to make mistakes. Otherwise we will not even realize what happens if. Yeah. So I think this is absolutely a normal thing that we do make mistakes. It's good to learn on them. Yeah. And then to not to repeat the mistakes. But anyway, I think this is the normal part of our business life and also personal one. Yeah? How many times did we make mistakes in a regular, even home relations, yeah, with our homemates? Leaders are made, not born. That's what you said.
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard it in one of the podcasts. I think the name was like Coaching for Leaders, if I'm not wrong. But the author of this podcast is also all the time underlining leaders are made, are not born. So it means we can lead the leaders, we can create the leaders, because who is the leader? This is a person who we expect to show the good way of solving some ideas, problems, challenges, showing us how to do things right. And then the leader is a person who we follow. Yeah, we follow the leaders. That's actually what was the title of our event this year.
That's right.
But
That is true. Yeah.
that's what I recall just a second
Nicely,
ago.
nicely connected there, Wiktor.
Yeah, but it just happened like that. But anyway, we can also show the leaders how to work, where to go, and how to use the environment where they are in. In your presentation, I actually liked, there were a number of things which I liked in your presentation, but there was one slide which was named 3S, which was showing basically the environment for not only for the leaders, but basically for the business. Can you share a few thoughts about the 3S?
The 3S or the 3Cs?
3 W's, actually.
3 W's. Okay, yeah, sorry. We've got lots of three. Yeah, we use lots of threes. Yeah. No, I think the 3 W's I spoke about actually were the workplace, work task, and workforce. And they were what we call the 3 W's of the future of work. And I think one of the things, Wiktor, that we did early on in our own development of our thinking within the Future of Work Institute was to develop a model, a strategic model for the future of work. Because I think that's the first really important point for me, is that as leaders, we need to recognize that the future of work is actually something strategic, and it's something that we can design for. So I think that's the first thing. So if you look at these 3 W's and you look at workplace, obviously, as leaders, we're now generally finding ourselves either working in some form of flexible or more flexible environment maybe than we were used to. In many instances, there are organizations where you've got hybrid type of working and hub and spoke type of working. And that puts a different type of pressure as well on leaders in terms of how they create a culture, you know. And I'm glad you mentioned, Wiktor, about the leadership piece in terms of, you know, their role on the cultural side. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So I think from our own research, hybrid working and flexible working has actually put a greater onus on the importance of leadership. And what we found is that average leaders prior to COVID, I hate to bring the COVID word up, but prior to COVID, struggled to motivate their teams over the, you know, past the COVID and into the more hybrid working world. Whereas excellent leaders really thrived, right? Because they put a big focus on that human side, you know, tipping into people, see how they were, you know, putting a real focus on getting groups of people together virtually, you know, when they couldn't bring them in together physically, and really putting an onus on the social aspect of their role. So I think the first thing was that whole workplace piece has become and is becoming a really critical part for leaders to actually go, you know, it is actually different to lead both virtually and physically. So I think that's a big thing. And I don't think we should, that's not something that I think we can just say, oh, we can just do that. Every leader can do that. It's really easy. In fact, we've been involved in a number of programs where we've been supporting leaders to make those transitions, you know, and how do you design a meeting that's engaging in virtual space? Simple questions that, you know, you can run past, but actually they need to be answered. So I think that's the first thing. I think when we talk about the workforce side, for me, to me, that's really around leaders thinking about what the value proposition of their organization is. Okay. So let's say if I'm a leader of a large business, you know, we all talk about the challenge for talent, the race for talent. Some people use the phrase war for talent, which is a phrase I don't like, because I don't like the phrase war full stop. I think we've heard that word too much in Europe, to be honest, unfortunately. But if we think about that, one of our roles as leaders is really to make sure that our organization is a compelling place to work. Okay. And often people will think that's about salary, you know, and it's about good perks and benefits. And that's part of it. But from our own work, we've actually identified 20 areas that attract and retain talent. And some of those areas cut from the culture of an organization, the quality of leadership within an organization, their focus on meaningful D&I practices, their investment in innovation and technology. All of these things actually have a major impact as to why me as an individual will join that organization. And even at a team level. So if I have a team of 20 or 30 people, I actually as a leader have an influence on creating that value proposition. I mightn't be able to do everything, but you know, I can look at culture as part of my value proposition. I can look at inclusivity as part of the value proposition. I can look at my focus on purpose, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So regardless of where we are as a leader within an organization, we actually have an ability to design that value proposition that's a little bit more, you know, valuable to the individuals that we're working with. So I think that's the second piece for me, which is around, and there's a much bigger piece around workforce, but just for the purpose of this conversation, value proposition, I think is a really important one. Less than 20% of organizations that we work with have actually a fully designed value proposition, which is really, really interesting in such a competitive talent environment. I think then thirdly, when we talk about the work task, they're about the tools and the technologies that, you know, we use to actually deliver the work, or the processes, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think that one of the, you know, big roles of a leader is to stand back and understand how we actually deliver work, right? How do we actually deliver work in as efficient and as meaningful a way as possible? And I use that word very specifically because we've come from a world of efficiency, right? Efficiency, get it done faster, get it done cheaper. Let's use some AI, let's use some robotic process automation, let's use some machine learning, bam, 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 bam. And interestingly enough, meaning is as important, because one of our key roles as a leader is to make sure that we're giving our people meaningful work. It doesn't have to be the exciting work. It doesn't have to be building rockets to the moon. It doesn't have to be, you know, but it has to be a meaningful type of work, where you have to inject meaning into the work. You have to connect the importance of that work to the overall purpose of the organization. And interesting enough, Wiktor, you know, we've done some work in the whole manufacturing and services 4.0 and 5.0 space. And what I find really, really interesting is, for all of the technologies that we can now have access at our fingertips, it's actually putting an even greater onus on the human being within the process. I often get asked around, you know, the net positive or negative impact of technology on work. And I think it's actually the wrong conversation. I think the conversation for me is, how do we actually create meaning in an increasingly automated working environment? As opposed to, will it take jobs? Will it do this? Will it do that? Yes, it will take some jobs, but it will create others. And for every commentator I speak to who says it will create jobs, somebody else will say it will destroy some of them. One of the things I would say is that we're in the age of these hyper-efficient organizations. So organizations that were built from technology, those organizations can do 10 times the amount of work with 10 times less people than organizations 60 years ago. So we have to also recognize the massive disruption that technology is having. But equally, I think we need to put the same level of effort into, what's the meaning of work for people now? How do we inject meaning for people at work? Like, I know, Wiktor, you love your job, because I know, well, you know, the few times I've met you, it's so obvious to me that, you know, there's real meaning in what you do. You've ownership over what you do. You're working on really cool things. You meet lots of cool people. And, you know, you find your path, right? I think one of the roles for me as a leader is to help others find that path, right? And to help others find that meaning, regardless of the role. You know, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, whatever type of role you're in, you know, I think we can find meaning within that context. So I think for me, that whole work task piece for me is around how can leaders obviously make work as efficient as possible for people and remove barriers. But alongside of that, how can they actually then create meaning? How can they put more connection with the work that people do on their day to day? Because we spend an awful lot of time at work, right? So we need to make sure that that's part of our role. And I do think the one big thing I would say, Wiktor, is that as we're moving into this more kind of human leadership, and I think one of the big roles for a leader is to recognize that they are an experience designer. They're designing an experience for these people. Now, that's in the context of still 40 to 45% of people are leaving organizations because of the quality of their leadership, or should I say the lack of quality of their leadership. So these are not small things. If we were to start looking at the cost of this, right, the cost to organizations, it is gargantuan, right? And, you know, lots of studies out there now showing the impact of poor leadership on mental health, on sense of meaning, on connections, so many things. So that's why I think we nearly need to use this post-COVID world to refresh our meaning around, refresh our understanding of what leadership is, and to evolve what that leadership can be for the leader as well. Because it's not just about, you know, and I think also the big thing for me as well, Wiktor, is, you know, all of your team leaders are leaders, right? All of your team members are leaders, right? And I think it's about, you know, I genuinely believe that if we're serious about leadership, the future of leadership is no leadership, because everybody's a leader, you know? So that's a really interesting thought, right? But if you really think about it, what are we really trying to get to here, you know? And that's always the question for me, like, what's our end goal for leadership, right? Because ultimately for me, our end goal should always be where it almost disappears to a point that we don't talk about it anymore, but it's intimate within, you know, who we are as individuals. So anyway, but a very long answer, Wiktor, but you asked you asked a difficult question, so I'm gonna
sorry, but that was actually very, very interesting. But to be honest, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we as people, probably not only we as only human beings, but the animals also do have it, that we do follow the leaders. We do follow some boys, girls, men, women who do have some interesting things to say or to do, or they just do things which are in the interest of a larger group, or we just think that this is a person who does something in such a way that it inspires the others. So I can agree that we may be the leaders in some kind of activities which we run, but in a larger scale, we do still need others who we follow, and actually there are such groups are created all around us. Yeah, so this is what inspires us to develop, to grow, and to even follow some kind of either acts or ideas or words which are being mentioned by those real leaders.
And Wiktor, can I actually add to that? Because I do agree. And actually, one of the things I do want to call out here, because I think it's important in the context of talent in general, is that one of the kind of main roles for me of leaders in this modern age is really what I would call a lighthouse for talent. Okay. So, you know, ultimately, you know, we could have all the big fancy branding and we get our brand out there, and, you know, many large organizations, because of their size, will naturally attract people. But most organizations will struggle at one point to get the right type of talent to drive their business. And they will actually join because of the leaders. And we see this a lot. We do a lot of work in terms of, you know, reputation branding for organizations on their employer brand. And every single time what we find is that when we do an interview with one of those leaders, or, you know, it could be a brand shot of a leader, them talking in an authentic way, the amount of people that apply for that role or apply for those ideas will skyrocket. So you're absolutely right. And I think for me, there are people like that we need now to stand up and to represent our organizations and to represent what's good about those organizations, and then by default will attract people into their business. I know I'm a particular type of leader, probably quirky and creative and all that kind of stuff. But that's the kind of people then I like to attract within my team, because we're not doing something that's simple. We're not doing something that's boring. So I do think from my perspective is the biggest way we can lead actually is to be this lighthouse for talent, and attract that talent that nobody else can get. It's hugely powerful, and I think sometimes we forget about that. And, people always say to me, Barry, you're always on social and you're always doing these talks and all this kind of stuff. But actually the amount of talented individuals that I've met because of that then have in some way worked with me or worked for me or, worked, on projects with us, it's priceless, and you don't realize that at the time that that's what you're doing, but now that I do know that, it's such an important role for leaders out there, and I met many leaders in Progress that all had really interesting stories, and, all are potential talent magnets for their organizations, more powerful than any recruitment function or any talent acquisition function or whatever are those leaders. And that's really where I think leadership makes a difference, is getting those people as part of your movement, as part of who as part of your purpose, big time.
Talking about time, I don't know if you are aware, but we are already half an hour on this talk.
No way.
And I have a feeling that we have
in other words, Wiktor, in other words, Barry, be quiet.
Yeah, but I have a feeling that we just touched a little bit the subject, and we could talk for another hours, which we don't have for today. But there is one thing which I would like to get the answer still in our today's talk. And actually this time I would like to ask you to make it quite short. And it is going like that. Leaders are leaders, and of course they do have ideas. We can create them. We can show them the way how to go. They can create themselves on their own, even and do the things. But they do also have challenges. And what do you think are the biggest challenges for the nowadays leaders?
Short answer?
As much short as it is only possible.
Dealing with conflicting requirements. That's my short answer. And what I mean by that is, if you think about many leaders, I'll give one example to keep it really tight. On one hand, they're being asked to create a hyper-efficient technological machine. And on the other hand, they're being asked to create a very human-centered organism, right? That's the biggest challenge of leadership for the next 20 years, is how can I actually link both of those two things together without my brain exploding, right? And that seems really simple. But for me, the future of leadership is around being able to deal with seemingly conflicting requirements and harmoniously bring those together into new solutions. So that's my shortest possible answer, Wiktor.
You mentioned 20 years. I will challenge it and say that it's for probably 10 years or maybe even
Possibly.
a little bit shorter time, because of the way how the technology evolves all around us, and especially
Absolutely.
that we have now, besides the technology created by human beings, also the technology solutions created by artificial intelligence, which may do some changes in the next coming months and years and decades, probably. But we'll see. Okay, we don't have a glass, let's say, a future in front of us. This is what we are guessing that it may happen like that. Anyway, I think this is not our last talk, Barry, to be honest, because there are so many elements which I would like to go deeper and deeper. So I would say not goodbye, but see you later in a moment. But before I leave you, I'd like to tell us how to find you and how to find the Future of Work Institute, because that might be useful for our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, no, that's really good, Wiktor. Look, you'll get me on LinkedIn. You'll also find me on barrywinkless.com, which is my own site, and there's lots of really nice articles there as well. And if you go to cpl.ie, you will find the Future Work Institute there as well. So, and I'm really, really open to collaborations, conversations, anything like that. So please do reach out.
So I will make sure to add those links to the description of this episode. So viewers, listeners, if anyone of you is interested into going deeper into the subject of future of work, or you would like to have a longer chat with Barry like I had today, then just go to the description, click those links, and I'm sure you will find Barry over there. Barry, thank you for today.
Thanks, Wiktor.